Oh dear. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Listen In. Today, we're going to talk about learning metaphor as summative assessment. You may remember from last time, Nikki mentioned this assignment that she does in her course, and we wanted to take a bit of a deeper dive in today. I am Sara Florence Davidson. My Haida name is Anjatku Sandlouts, which means Killer Whale Woman of the Dawn. And I am joining you from the unceded territories of the Katzie, Kwantlen, and Semiahmoo peoples. Pass over to
Thanks.
you.
My name is Nikki, and I am a colonizer of Chinese and Mennonite descent, and I am joining us today from the traditional unceded and contemporary territories of the Coquitlam people. It's a gorgeous day, and I'm just reminded about how important the land is for us and sustaining to us. Yeah.
So we'll jump right in um, and just invite you to talk a little bit more about this assignment. Um, and I'm wondering if you can start with the challenges you were facing with assessment in your course and sort of kind of help us to understand a little bit more about what led you to come into this assignment, and then we'll dive in a bit more about assessment as well.
Yeah. So the number one concern or preoccupation when I'm thinking about teaching is to cause no harm. I mean, that just seems so like I don't want anybody to be hurting or to be harmed through what we're doing in the classroom. And I think anxiety, and especially after COVID, was like super on the rise. And so to me, this was a big sort of thing that I have been thinking about. How can I reduce anxiety in the classroom? And there are other factors in terms of hierarchies, so how assessments can reinforce hierarchies according to particular cognitive abilities. I think that some testing really just leads to more of that surface learning in a lot of courses, especially if we're introducing diverse perspectives. I think the amount of content really becomes overwhelming, and kind of predicting what the instructor thinks is important. It just feels like a game that is not really about learning, but about how do I sort of navigate through this thing called school. And it's very cognitively based. And it doesn't typically ask students to make meaning or tie things together sort of across the course. So there's lots of kind of problems that I was really struggling with in terms of sort of those usual kind of midterm final exam type of things. And so, yeah, I tried to reimagine it.
And reimagine it you did.
I did.
So can you take us through the assignment and just sort of maybe share with us how this new assignment addresses some of the challenges that you were facing?
Yeah, so what I'm asking students to do, and I have used this assignment for several years, so I've kind of refined it as I've gone along. But basically, I'm asking students to make something, like a real thing, that represents their overall learning journey in this course, based on 7 to 10 resources that they encountered through this class. And it's my Education 200 educational psychology course that I'm talking about. So things that students, could make could be a weaving, a painting, a poem, a collage, dance, write a song, diorama, puppet, like whatever they want. And resources, we have tons of resources in our class. Every class we do 5 to 6 readings, and so they can choose from those kind of syllabus resources, but they can also choose from their own reflections, which they complete after each class, their inquiry project, the inquiry projects that they've encountered through their peer presentations. So anything that they have encountered through the course. So 7 to 10 is actually it's maybe 10, less than 10% of the overall resources that are available through our course. So it's actually not very much at all. And so in making something, I'm hoping, actually, I'm just going to slip in this educational psychology term, but to kind of activate that default attentional network that allows for a deeper reflection. It's kind of like when your mind is wandering and you're thinking about different things in new and creative ways. And so if you, let's say, love painting and you're painting and you're like, oh yeah, and thinking about the content and thinking about how things fit together and how you're going to paint a picture based on that and arrange sort of the different elements and components of the painting, then it really helps you to engage more deeply, holistically, in sort of that physical, emotional, spiritual, mental sense, and to sort of explore like, well, what does this actually mean to me? Why were these resources important? Why was this learning important? And so we're really sort of engaging in that metaphorical meaning making that is so connected to Indigenous story work, right? So when she's talking about stories, when Kung Kim is talking about stories, she's really talking about this idea of making meaning from metaphors that are connected to, our lived experiences. And so that's what I'm hoping students will do through this metaphor assignment and just really not only think about how the content sort of relates to their lived experience, but this is an extension. No, they don't have to do it, but but to maybe even continue to learn or to deepen relationship or to sort of deepen their own experience of life through this assignment. So to have those opportunities to do those things. Does that make sense?
It does, and I'm wondering if you can maybe elaborate a bit more on the summative assessment part to it, just because I think a lot of educators are really excited about these ideas, and then are maybe wonder about how do we actually bring them into our classroom if we can't assess them. So I'm wondering if you can speak a bit to that as well.
Yeah, so it's summative in the sense that it's asking students to reflect on the overall learning that they've done in the course, to make those connections and to make meaning for themselves. And a lot of students have actually sort of surfaced this as the difficult part about the assignment. So they go back, they look at their reflections that they've done every week since the beginning of the course. They think about sort of those aha moments, the transformational learning that might have happened, their discussions that they've had with their reading groups and different things. And so, and also the resources that they engaged with. And so thinking about, well, what did I learn here? How does that connect to sort of maybe a broader theme? So what I asked them to do is fill out this little template and think of sort of this overarching big idea, and then think about how these other little ideas fit into it. So for example, maybe they think now that, diversity is important. So it's kind of this big, broad idea. And then within that, they might talk about diverse identity development models or diverse experiences of school and motivation because of that. And so then these little ideas sort of fit into that. And so then when they're thinking about their metaphor and how they can kind of tie that all together, they can think of it in terms of the big picture and then all of those little components that kind of serve as part of this larger picture. And so when they're thinking about all those little components and how those resources fit into that, then they're really forced to make those connections across the course. And also then to think about, well, how do they all fit together? And I think when I just think about the courses that I've taken in my life, like I haven't really been asked to do that. It's more of maybe the professor did that in terms of the syllabus or, something like that. Or even in terms of the question that they're asking, as an essay or research question. But I've never been asked to do that. And so I really want them to think about, like, we talked about identity development. Why is that important for learning and development? And so to think about the different topics and how they fit together, to me, is really that sort of summative piece so that they can walk away with like a clear sense of direction.
Mhm.
So I learned all of this stuff from this course. And now when I go to teach, I'm going to be fundamentally changed in this one way, as opposed to trying to remember all of these different theorists, right?
Yeah.
And then you're like in front of the kids, and like Piaget is not the first thing that jumps into my mind, or whatever theorist. That's not the first thing. It's like, what do I do? And so I just want them to have this one clear direction that's going to shape how they engage with the environment and with the kids, and to
Mhm.
be able to think about that. And because they have this one concise metaphor, I mean, they could maybe, this is just something I painted, but they might have like a little bookmark that they can be like, oh yeah, this is how I think about learning. And then that can drive, their interactions, how they show up, how they're framing their lesson plans, or, whatever kind of activities that they're doing. And so hopefully it kind of helps them with that in terms of even remembering the things that they've learned. Yeah.
Mhm. And how have the students responded and taken it up?
So the students are amazing, as they always are. But they have written short stories, picture books, posters, sort of kind of, those are maybe some of the standard responses. They've done things like dance, they have done walking videos, crochet, macrame, baking and cooking are pretty typical. One student compared making like a can of tomato soup to making tomato soup from scratch. And that was her learning, her idea about learning before the course and then after the course.
I love that.
Um, yeah, one student made a model of a house. A student hosted a potluck with her family and kind of talked about some of the ideas. Another student made a sauna, songwriting, singing, a
Hmm.
zine, podcast, videos, brochures, sculpture, paint, everything that you could think of. And I really want them to sort of build from their strengths, their interests,
Mm.
what they want to do. Often they'll learn a new skill. So my one student who crocheted, I've had lots of students crochet, but one student just learned that for this metaphor. And so, yeah, it's really interesting what they come up with. We do have an article, and we can post it in the notes, that I wrote with Alicia Hebert, who was one of my students in like 2020. And she wrote a story called Fuzzy Feet and the Skunk. And so
Hmm.
we kind of did some writing around that, and published an article, but that kind of gives you a sense of the kind of ways that students take it up. Yeah.
Wow. And with so many different ways that folks are engaging, how do you even begin to engage in assessment, if especially if it's a summative assessment?
Yeah. So we start by co-creating criteria,
Mhm.
and this is probably something that teachers often do, but I ask students how they'd like to be assessed and what they think would be fair to distinguish their work from maybe students who don't put in as much effort, or those students who really put in like lots of effort and interest and, engagement. And so thinking about those different things, and we kind of have come up with sort of quite similar categories over time. I find generally we talk about, how the metaphor explains learning from the resources, the connections they make, the reflection and growth process, and then the resources that they bring in. So it's really about the processes that they have engaged with and how they have expressed their learning. Not how, what they have expressed in terms of their learning, as opposed to how they have expressed it. So I don't have any marks on, let's say, grammar. I don't have any marks on grammar. I mean, I need to be able to understand what they're saying, but I don't mark grammar. I don't mark how well they can paint. Like, I'm certainly not in a position where I can assess like a dance and say this is a good dance and this is not. Like, I have no clue, right? And so it's not about assessing the mode of expression, or the medium of expression. It's really about what did they learn and the content of what they're trying to convey.
Mhm.
Yeah, so that's what we focused on.
Yeah. I've done something similar where I've started with a rubric and said, okay, this is how I'm assessing you. You have kind of carte blanche in terms of what you do to express this, but this is the way. So if folks are feeling nervous about doing that co-constructing of the rubric, it is possible to do maybe the step before that, where you work with a rubric that's pre-existing and invite students to think about how they can demonstrate the learning that is going to be assessed. So thank you very, very much. I don't know if you want to add anything else, or maybe potentially resources that if people are interested in learning more or thinking through some of these ideas that you've shared.
Yeah, so there's the CAST website, which talks a lot about universal design for learning, which is really where a lot of this for me has come from.
Mhm.
So I have a background as a special education teacher, and something that resonated with me is that, students can demonstrate their knowledge in lots of different ways. And if you're taking science, you don't need to have to write about science to show that you can, that you've learned about science. And so that kind of idea has stuck with me for a long time. So that UDL piece, I think, has been important. I also really like Unearthing Joy by Gholdy Muhammad. And so thinking about how to bring joy into the classroom. I think the book on developing self-regulating learners is really great to kind of help us think about how to structure different choices. And books like Learning to Carve Argillite might, for example, show a learning metaphor and how we can talk about learning through story, right? And so things like that. I think we read this book on our first day, which I think I mentioned before, but like already I'm prepping them so that they can think about, metaphorically how they might represent ideas around learning. And this is a great piece to kind of make those connections for them. So we
Amazing.
start right at day one.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you, and thank you so much for sharing your learning metaphor with us.
Yes, thank you for your wonderful questions.
Okay, see you next time.